Oh man, normally I don't really know if I would cover a topic like this, but for the first time in months, we have ourselves a legitimate trade rumor that depicts a fairly high-profile National Hockey League player and a potential situation that says, hey, there's another team that is not the team that he currently plays for that really, really wants to acquire this player. Let's take a look at PittsburghHockeyNow.com and look at Dan Kingerski's article, Penguins Trade Talk, More on the Goalie Situation. The article opens up talking about how Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry are the two goaltenders in Pittsburgh that have been battling it out, sharing the crease, and have started somewhat of a new goaltender controversy in Pittsburgh. Before it was Murray and Jarry, it was Murray and Fleury, because Fleury was the guy who was there forever, and he was really good, and then Matt Murray came out of nowhere, and then he was really good, and all of a sudden the playoffs happened, 2 cups happened, and now Marc-Andre Fleury is a Vegas Golden Knight. Jarry, however, is the new guy on the scene, who honestly was pretty good this past season, and who has forced Penguins management, fans, and media into speculation as to who should be that number 1 guy going forward. With Matt Murray getting an .899 save percentage this past season and Jarry getting a .921, there is definitely a discussion to be had as to who should be manning the crease full-time once the season comes back, once the playoffs start, once the Penguins go into the next few years. Obviously, there are people on both sides of the fence here. This article opens up talking about how Josh Yohei of The Athletic talked to Penguins GM Jim Rutherford and got Rutherford to admit that yes, a trade is possible in regards to this scenario that we're taking a look at here. And this is where the article starts to get a little bit interesting. Rutherford's public comments on Tuesday dovetailed to a February Penguins trade report from Pittsburgh Hockey Now, in which the Penguins began taking calls on their goalies near the 2020 NHL trade deadline, so this is back in February. Rutherford had no intention of making a deal for one of his netminders. Still, the conversations began with the expectation of culminating in a deal at or before the 2020 NHL draft. Multiple sources told Pittsburgh Hockey Now in February and confirmed days later that team was the Colorado Avalanche and GM Joe Sakic. The sources split on which goalie was the primary target of the Penguins' trade talks, though the more senior voice said it was Matt Murray. Now both sources agree that Murray is the more likely target. Hey, there was apparently a plan to trade a Matt Murray to Colorado by the time the 2020 NHL entry draft came to peace. Now, some may be wondering, okay, if they were talking about a trade, why didn't they do it then? Why did they say at the trade deadline, hey, here's my number, call me maybe once the draft comes along and we'll get this trade done and dealt with then? Not now though, but then. Well, it's actually acknowledged towards the end of the article here. It talks about how the Colorado Avalanche ended up signing goaltender Pavel Francouz to a $4 million 2-year deal before the trade deadline, and, there's a situation that occurs like, okay, what if Grubauer does really well in the playoffs? What if Murray doesn't? Then the situation changes on the fly, and it makes it so that the terms that you dealt with back then aren't really super applicable now. Also, if you're the Penguins, would you really want to give up on a Matt Murray so early on before a pending playoff run and say with 110% certainty that Jarry is going to be your guy throughout a grueling 4-series playoff run? That's not something that I think anybody can say is a super smart move, relying on the brand new guy who is fresh into the league, and just keeping a guy like Matt Murray on your team, who was worse statistically than Jarry, but who does have the experience that he does, certainly has its own benefit that is not written in the stats or anything. It's literally just a human trait that is irreplaceable in this situation. Now, jumping back to where we are in the article spends the majority of its body talking about the context of the goaltending situation in Pittsburgh. How Matt Murray was the starter. He was the guy. In October, he was amazing. Casey DeSmith was down there in the AHL, and Jarry was the guy who in November and December came to town and absolutely crushed it between the pipes, cementing a level of love for him from the fan base that Matt Murray just wasn't really getting anymore because he was starting to fall off and go on a rough run. It's at this time where Pittsburgh Hockey Now actually says that Joe Sakic from Colorado was watching the situation closely and that he actually really liked Jarry. I know this article talks about how it's Murray who is the guy who was apparently in Colorado trade talks, but obviously if you're a guy like Sakic, you're watching the Penguins, you take a look at both of these goalies and you say, darn, that Jarry guy's pretty gosh darn good, isn't he? So for them to be saying that he was interested, it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, who doesn't like good goalies if you're a GM, right? But when it comes to Matt Murray and Colorado, one thing that I have been missing out on, not been talking about this entire video, is why the Avs would want him. Now, when it comes to that, there is an established idea within this article here that labels what could potentially be and what is the probable scenario here if this does indeed go down. It comes in about the 60% mark of the article over here. Colorado kicked the tires on Matt Murray at the trade deadline, but both sides knew nothing immediate would come of the talks. Instead, they were building towards a deal in the summer. Colorado is looking ahead to the Stanley Cup battles. The team is loaded. Nova Scotia-born star Nathan MacKinnon is reaching the peak of his hockey powers. Colorado and defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis have established themselves as the powers in the West and have the best two records in the Western Conference. However, number one goalie Philip Grubauer is only 18-12-4 with an acceptable .916 save percentage. Colorado was looking for a change. So ultimately it comes down to that. They're not happy with Francouz and Grubauer, and they would much rather have a guy who is, quote-unquote, better. But that leaves me with an interesting idea here, because this article doesn't really go over what a return could be. It just says that interest is there for Murray from the Colorado point of view. It doesn't really say anything about the Penguins wanting something back. But because of the way the Penguins' goaltending situation has been laid out, with the Smith being okay, with Murray being meh, and with Jarry being the way he is, it kind of piques my interest as to what the Penguins would want. Would they necessarily ask for a guy like Grubauer back? I'm not really too sure. You already have some pretty good goaltenders, and furthermore, if you want a goalie back, to me it speaks more volume to the idea that they would just want to balance out the goaltenders, just a goalie for a goalie and add some other stuff on the side there. You probably know from playing NHL GM mode that when you trade a goalie to a team and you don't get a goalie back, it kind of gets really wonky when you deal with the amount of contracts you have. So maybe there could be some interest for a Francouz back, or let's just say the Penguins try to go all out and they say, hey, give us Justus Annunen, that goaltender prospect they have, who I made a video about earlier in the year, by the way, who is one of the most underrated goaltending prospects in the entire NHL. He was better than Tuukka Rask was when Tuukka Rask was his age. He's a guy who also got signed to a contract a little bit earlier, so if the Penguins are really looking for a diamond in the rough, they can get that with a guy like Annunen. But other than that, there are prospects, there are players that the Colorado Avalanche could see as potential trade pieces, but a lot of these players and prospects aren't really pieces that I could see fetching a suitable return for a guy like Murray. Either that or they're a little bit too overpriced. For example, I think if you go Murray for a guy like Newhook, you could debate that Murray is a tad more valuable because of his experience and the way he was able to play the game in his prime. On the other hand, though, a guy like Bowen Byram, in my opinion, is a little bit more too valuable in that situation. So it's probably going to come to a deal of seconds and maybe thirds and maybe B, C tier prospects when it comes to a trade like this, but the idea is out there, and if the NHL is able to go along with what was supposed to be an early draft, it could nix this entire idea entirely, but the way things are right now, a possibility does exist that by the end of next season, let's just say, Matt Murray could be a Colorado Avalanche, and that is really, really weird to me. So I hope you enjoyed this video search that Trost 99. Comment down below what you think about this topic. I'm looking forward to reading all of those, and bye.